Hello, everybody. Once again, I feel like we're living in a Federer world, at least for another few more days. It'll get real, probably close to fever pitch, I imagine, come the weekend. I have my coffee at the ready. Are you ready, Jack, to talk about his time at the US Open? Is it fair, by the way, for me to say that probably because the second half of his career was not nondescript there, but it was nothing like the first half. So is it fair to suggest that this is the slam that maybe slips the memory a bit more? At least it is for me, because I know he didn't have anywhere near the success he had at the US, like he had in Paris. But there was a Paris narrative that was so strong. Wimbledon and Federer go hand to hand together, like hand in glove. And Australia, I don't know, there was the Renaissance, I think, that managed to sort of reignite that fire, if you like, in 2017, 2018. So, in fact, I found it a bit harder to jog the memory for Federer at the US Open. Does that make any sense?
That totally makes sense, John. Yeah, I've just finished my coffee, so I am ready as well. Don't worry. I would say I know what you mean. That it's difficult for us to sort of piece together a compelling story, I guess, for Federer at the US Open. But I think the best place to start and the thing to remember is that Federer's US Open run from 04 to 08 isn't something you can kind of forget about, because it was a seriously dominant run, just so impressive. So many matches in there that were incredibly just one-sided and Federer-esque. He was great. Like I think there's a lot of iconic Federer moments from the US Open throughout those years.
Iconic kits too, I found. That was
Yeah,
that
iconic
was
kits.
the sort of red and grey, red and sort of brown combos I thought were pretty cool. Certainly much cooler than the beige outfit I remember him having for his French Open semi against Rafa in 2019. Which was normally he was the epitome of cool. I would say that was one of his least cool outfits. Apologies, Uniqlo. We are available for sponsorship here, and we can edit this out if we're open to that. Yeah, democracy, etc. Anyway, listen. So yeah, I completely agree, and certainly that first. The 5 years in a row anyway, winning it. No one's obviously won it 5 times in a row. No one's even won it twice in a row since, I think.
I know, yes, a bit of bizarre slam, obviously.
Yeah, it is a bizarre slam, and perhaps that's why it's many people's favorite slam, just because of the sort of randomness of it. It didn't quite reach big three domination levels, and of course it'll have a special place in your heart as well, this slam, because of 2012, and we'll weave the Federer narrative into this too as we come across it. But 2012, Andy Murray winning it.
Yeah, of course. The only hardcourt slam we won, obviously, after the Australian Open heartbreak. So absolutely does. Yeah, it's we cling on to it as Andy fans.
Listen, I mean, I go down the Nadal path quite a bit, always keeping Federer sort of alongside, bearing in mind the week we're having here. But I think it's fine to just go off topic from time to time. And does that sort of surprise and disappoint you that he only won one hardcourt slam?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he definitely deserved more than that. I mean, he made 6 other finals, right? So 5 in Australia and 1 at the US Open. Unprecedented. I think that sort of conversion rate, and obviously Djokovic at the Australian Open was the gatekeeper. I think 4 of the finals were Djokovic, and then the other 2 finals were Federer, so not so shabby either. Obviously, it felt very unfair, I think, because Andy would have been fine against basically anybody else on the tour.
If he could have played Philippoussis or
Yeah.
Rafa, or I know we're going over generations and stuff, but that's what we do on Talking Tennis. We live in a fantasy world sometimes, and I did mention it yesterday. There was a great question that was posed in the live chat about who was Federer lucky or unlucky to be 5 years older than Andy Murray, but also, of course, Novak and Rafa. And I suggested that actually, I think, yeah, he was probably a little bit lucky because he could have a good run at it. He had a good run up for 5 years almost of managing to win Wimbledon every year without being threatened. Of course, 06, 07, 08, Rafa sort of started to eat into that, but Murray, of course, in particular, never got anywhere, no run up at all, really. I mean, when did Murray make his Wimbledon debut? 05?
Back in 2005, yeah, when he lost in Abandon.
Yeah, and that was it. And did he sort of run out of legs that particular tournament?
He was two sets up to Nalbandian. It's the only time he's lost from 2 sets up.
Oh wow, okay, nice.
Yeah.
Nalbandian, of course, another sort of figure that obviously crosses paths with quite a few of these players early on in their careers. Okay, so listen, I've been sort of tweeting out some stuff regarding Federer. When did he make his debut there? Was it 2000?
Year 2000, yeah.
Do you know who he played? Because I'm just trying to get the stats up now.
Yeah, I've got it here. This one I don't know from memory, I'm afraid, but I've got it here.
Great.
What's that, sorry?
Go for it.
Yeah. So the first match he played was against Peter Wessels, and he came back from 2 sets to love down, which is super impressive. Oh no, yeah, he did. Yeah, 2 sets to love down, which is
wow,
a crazy slam debut. Yeah, to be fair, Wessels retired in the 5th set, but still incredibly impressive.
Yeah,
and then Daniel Nestor, obviously decent doubles player in his day, and he lost to Juan Carlos Ferrero. So he made a pretty good account for himself, apparently, losing in a tiebreak in the 4th set, 3 tight sets, and a 6-1 set to Federer. So great debut.
No, not bad at all. So that was the
year
2000.
Any memory of that one, though, John? I gotta say.
No, don't worry. I mean, listen, I'm 20 years old at that point, but my memories are fairly vague on the first sort of 3 or 4 years. I've got some of the final stuff that we'll be going through obviously very shortly, and that will pretty much dominate this. That's from yesterday when we did the old Wimbledon stuff. But yeah, I mean, that will obviously be very heavily mentioned. But his early years, probably until sort of 2004. Have you got some of the stats as well regarding sort of 2001 to 2003?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, the sort of highlights there, obviously. Losing to Andre Agassi in 2001 in the round of 16, so made a decent run there too. 2002, obviously, he was starting to get established. I'm sure he'd won a Masters that year, so he was really starting to look like a force to be reckoned with. Beat Michael Chang on the way out, and he lost to Max Mirny in the round of 16 there too. So, he was making deep runs every time he went.
Did you say he beat Chang?
He beat Chang, but Chang was on the way out at 132 in the
on the way out in terms of his career, yeah. But he actually, I think it's the second major meeting he had with Chang. I think we touched on one that he had in Australia. It may even have been his first ever match in Australia was against Chang. I'm not sure. I think. Go on.
No, why? No, I didn't know that. That's all.
Yeah, I think so. Listen, we touched on it. I mean, I'm learning stuff as we go through this, and I think his first ever match in Australia was against Chang. And right now, I can't remember if he won or lost that match, but I'm sure somebody in the live chat will help us or jog our memory, or we'll have to check afterwards because we're here to focus on the US today rather than Australia. Just a quick point in general about him at the US Open. He won 11 hardcourt slams in total. 10 more than Murray, and 6 in Australia and 5 in the US. Of course, in Australia, it was much more spread out. His US ones all came in one huge chunk. By the way, I made a mistake in the description of this video. I think I said he won more US Opens than any other male, which is kind of true, but he actually also shares that record with Sampras and Jimmy Connors. Yeah. Of course, what's unprecedented, though, is the fact that, of course, he won all 5 in a row.
Yeah.
I don't know if from a fan's perspective, it's better to win 5 in a row or win 5 spread out. I mean, it's nice to have the stat to look back on, but then you've also got a decade of frustration, whereas at least if you have them peppered around, then it's nice. Of course, he also finished runner-up on a couple of occasions too.
You forget about living it though and breathing it. Obviously, John. Every time the US Open comes on, and you're like, "Well, my man's gonna win it this year, right?" I mean, that must be a great feeling.
Exactly. So that also sort of takes away some of the. Listen, I'm sure looking back now, it's great, and you feel great about the Wimbledons that he won 5 in a row. Of course, he won 5 majors in a row in New York too. But I do think when you're a fan and you're sort of going, oh, okay, yeah, it's New York. I'm not quite as nervous about this one as I am about the French Open. If you're a Federer fan, of course, and with nerves, by the way, comes a level of exaltation when it works out. Anything else to sort of add to the sort of 03, 02, 03 period?
Yeah, there was just the 03 run as well. Another round of 16, he loses to Nalbandian in the round of 16. That would be the last loss he would sustain until 2009, of course. So there's a lot to cover in between. Great. I remember that match as well. Nalbandian played great, but when Federer was playing at his best level of the US Open, he was kind of untouchable, and it was the sort of match he could have won. And in fact, he plays Nalbandian within this big run, and it's a completely different scoreline. So we'll get onto that soon, I'm sure.
Okay, yeah. So how many times did him and Nalbandian play each other? I'll have a quick look at that head to head actually. Nalbandian Federer. While we talk about 2004, of course, which is the run that he had to win his first title. Was it as comfortable as sort of the stats suggest?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think he dropped 2 sets the whole tournament, or 3 sets the whole tournament. Sorry, I should say. And one of them was two of them were to Andre Agassi. It was a 5-set match. That was a great match, and really not much in it at all. Just looking at the stats there, Federer actually ended up losing more points than Agassi. It must have been really close. Every time they played at the US Open, Agassi's level was obviously great. We all know how good Agassi is. And obviously the next year they played as well in the final. And I would argue Agassi was playing just as well in this 5-set match as he was in that US Open final. But somehow Federer kept it to 4 sets in that final. I'm jumping ahead though, to be fair.
I know. But I'll tell you what I think is really cool is the fact that his first 2 US Opens are won by beating Agassi and Hewitt, or Hewitt and Agassi. Agassi and Hewitt, or Hewitt and Agassi. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Was it 04, 05?
Hewitt then Agassi.
Hewitt then Agassi. I think that's kind of cool that the eras overlap a bit, because I mean, for Djokovic, of course, it's a bit less fortunate. He didn't really get to play. I'm pretty sure he never played either Agassi or Djokovic. Or Hewitt. Funny enough, I didn't even know until probably the last couple of years that Agassi's last ever match was at Wimbledon, I think, and it was against Rafael Nadal.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know
pretty
that
sure. Maybe not. It was either his last ever match or his last match at Wimbledon. And in fact, as a sort of unique moment, they did an on-court interview, which has only been a thing for the last year or two at Wimbledon, a couple of years at Wimbledon. They did an on-court interview, I think, with both players. And Rafa's English, well, it's not as good as it is today. Let's put it that way. But it's still, you still get the message, and that's fine. But anyway, that's Andre Agassi. Maybe we'll have an Andre Agassi week or even month sometime in the future. But listen, regarding, by the way, Federer's head-to-head against Nalbandian, it's pretty close. Give me they played each other 19 times, okay? So can you give me a completely random guess, Federer Nalbandian?
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine Nalbandian maybe takes quite a few of their first meetings, right? So I'm going to say, 19 did you say overall?
Yeah.
As much as that, maybe 11-8 to Federer.
Woo! Take a bow.
Is that right?
Take a bow. It's an
go.
educated guess. I mean, I know you know, but it's still good, and you pretty much got it. I mean, Nalbandian won the first 5 in New York in 2003 and Australia in 2003 as well, and also in Cincinnati and in Basel as well. And the Basel match was a 3-setter in 2002. Obviously, Federer was a very different player then to others, and also in Monte Carlo on clay. Perhaps you'd expect that one. That was their first meeting, and it was a drubbing for Nalbandian. But then if you take away those 5, Nalbandian only won 1, 2, 3 more in the next sort of 15 or so or 14 matches. So yeah, that's certainly swung it, and that's pretty much the story of Federer's probably head-to-heads really all round. The first 2 or 3 they probably played, it probably went against him, and then he managed to turn it around. So yeah, back to 2004. He gets to the final. He plays Agassi. I think we said he wasn't in the final in that tournament.
Hewitt in
04, but he beats Agassi in the semis, right?
Quarters. So it was Henman in the semis.
But he wiped the floor with Hewitt in the final. I mean, he
double bagel.
I mean, listen, I remember Hewitt in 2002. I saw him play in 2003, by the way, which is obviously the year that Federer went on to win his first Wimbledon. I was actually there on the opening day in 2003. But I was probably your typical British tennis fan in that I knew what went on at the other slams. I have some vague memories of the Australian Open being on terrestrial TV, the final. But that would be at like 5 a.m. And if you were lucky, you might get some snippets of the US Open. But largely, my tennis life was 2 weeks in Wimbledon. And I went to my first Wimbledon in 2003, and I got to see Hewitt on the opening day. And he lost to Karlovic, and he was the reigning champion in 2002. And of course, but I just saw him win Wimbledon. Probably maybe in 2002, Hewitt was the first player on the men's side, at least anyway, to win Wimbledon from the back of the court, and also his height, and he was kind of the new Wimbledon model, if you like. And I just hadn't seen him play for a year. I was like, okay, he's probably going to win Wimbledon again. He was so good last year. Of course, a lot can change in 12 months, and it did. It even changed a lot that day. He won the first set against Karlovic, and I think he went on to lose for the next 3 and lose out in 4 sets altogether. And that was the year, of course, Federer went on to win his first. So I'm sure by 04, Hewitt's light was fading a bit. Of course, Hewitt did win. Did he win 2 majors? I think he won Wimbledon and maybe Australia.
US as well. US
as well. Okay, so he had a good 3 of the 4, if you like. But Federer smashed him in that final.
Yeah, absolutely did. It's interesting because I reckon Hewitt was probably still a pretty good contender against anybody else. I mean, he made the final that year, made the semis the next year. And yeah, that stat you've got there sums it up, right? He lost to Federer in 5 of the 8 slam tournaments between 04 and 05. So he was there or thereabouts. He was
running into Federer.
He really was no match for Federer. Yeah, because Federer was way too big from the back of the court and served way too confidently, which maybe was Hewitt's downfall, I guess. He wasn't the best server in the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, he just didn't have a chance. It was a whitewash, not a whitewash every time they played, but it just never felt like Hewitt was really going to trouble him in any of those matches.
I mean, 2 bagels. I mean, he wins 6 games, Hewitt, but 2 bagels kind of feels kind of unprecedented. I mean, certainly from my memory, I don't remember a men's slam final where 2 of the 3 sets were bagels, and it almost doesn't matter that the other one was 7-6. It almost, I mean, that could be 6-1. It doesn't really matter. It's the fact that it's 2 bagels there. I mean, it's just kind of odd to think, and especially as, of course, a lot of the major finals in the last few years have been including players like obviously Murray and Djokovic and Federer and Rafa. Do you like how I got Murray in there first? So you're not going to see too many bagels between those guys. And so, yeah, I guess that's it. And yeah, as I say, Hewitt really found Federer to be his bogeyman, particularly at majors over that 2-year period.
It's interesting, actually, when people make the argument for the sort of weak era, I guess. I guess some people do have fairly compelling arguments, but in terms of numbers, I mean, Federer from 04 to 08, just take a look at the rankings of his last 3 opponents every time in the final, the semi-final, and the quarterfinal. So at 04, it was 5-6-7. 05, it was 7-4-11, so just missing it in top 10 players. 2006, 10-6-7. 2007, 3-4-5. I mean, for those 4 years, bar 2005, where he played the number 11 player, he was playing 3 top 10 players in a row every time.
In this, from the quarters to the victory, basically.
Yeah. 08 was just 2 top 10 players, but there were Andy Murray and Novak Djokovic, so not bad. I mean, he's still playing the best players in the world. It's not just a nobody that's rocking up to the final.
That's in the US in particular, that's really impressive. I mean, I think some of his Wimbledon victories, of course, he played Philippoussis, who I think reached a world ranking high of 8 for his first one, but I don't even know where Philippoussis would have been in the rankings at that point, maybe just outside the top 10. I know he played Roddick, of course, quite a few times early on with some of those Wimbledon victories. Yeah. But it felt in a way, as you mentioned there from the stats, the runs to the US Open title felt much tougher, although on the court and the results gave a very different picture. Listen, maybe if I was being a bit harsh on Hewitt regarding 04, I don't think it's unfair to suggest by 05, Agassi, I think he retired in 06. So we are looking at if not the dying embers, we are looking at the final paragraph of Agassi's story, if you like.
To be fair, he was great that tournament. I honestly thought he was so good. Maybe a little bit less than his absolute heyday, but in the same way that Sampras managed to win in 2002, this probably should have been Agassi's swan song if anybody but Federer was standing on the other side of the net that day, because Federer played an absolute clinic. I don't think he's played a better match at the US Open.
How do you feel about this is Federer related, because Federer is now obviously heading into retirement, and lots of speculation as to, I think the speculation in the coming weeks will gather pace as to what he will end up doing. But what do you think about some of the comments that sort of come up again recently, but do appear from time to time, about Sampras and about Agassi and their involvement in the sport? When we compare it, say, to Billie Jean King or Martina Navratilova or even Chrissy Evert, perhaps, on the women's side, we see them, front and we see them in getting involved in broadcasting, but also in terms of ambassadorial roles and all that sort of stuff. How do you feel about the fact that Agassi and Sampras have just sort of faded away from the sport, so to speak?
Well, there's other male stars that are very heavily involved in the sport, and I think Agassi and Sampras in some regards, but definitely Agassi haven't made any. They haven't pretended they absolutely love the sport off the court, basically. Sure. And I absolutely understand Agassi not being involved with tennis after his career's over.
Personally, I don't really care. Honestly, I don't. I mean, if they're involved, great. If they're not, well, no big deal. I mean, listen, if they're your, I mean, I loved Agassi growing up, and more than Sampras, but I have no problem. I think there's a sort of an interview with Sampras he did with CNN. If you go for Sampras interviews, maybe it's the first one you'll find, and it's from about 6 or 7 years ago. I think it's when he's talking about Rafa and maybe even Roger going through a sort of a barren period, and he's just sort of saying about how it'll come back. And I do remember him being at Wimbledon most years for the final. I remember seeing him sat there as Federer reeled in his record. Pretty sure he was there that day when Federer overtook him with the 15th major winning against Roddick at Wimbledon. But I don't recall him it really being there much since then. That was sort of probably 2009. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, I also think when it comes to coaching, and this is an interesting one because we've talked about Federer as well, potentially going on to maybe have a coaching career. I'm not necessarily sure that that's any guarantees, bearing in mind we see it in other sports, and I think of football in particular. I mean, the absolute greats don't necessarily translate to being amazing coaches because perhaps they can't empathize with some of the difficulties that, Federer, imagine Federer coaching somebody, imagine Federer coaching Shapovalov, for example, and saying, why can't you hit 100 winners in a row? Why can't you hit that baseline constantly? Or going to Zverev and saying, why do you have that second serve from time to time? So yeah, I think sometimes with these greats, maybe it's a little bit more difficult to turn to coaching. In fact, that's why perhaps we see people such as Cahill, for example, who I hope he doesn't mind me saying didn't have the most illustrious of careers, certainly compared to somebody like Federer or Agassi, etc. How, again, Sampras and these players were just so natural that, becoming a coach, I think can't always translate. Even perhaps a broadcaster as well, maybe the same. Anyway, I digress. Any final comments on that 0-5 run and beating Agassi in the final?
No, just the final was absolutely great. If you've not seen it, go watch it back. It was so impressive and incredibly entertaining.
I mean, it was certainly competitive for the first 3 sets, at least as far as the scoreboard is concerned. And yeah, I think that's the alarm bell telling us we need to move on. 2006. I've got these. As you can see from my notes, they're getting briefer and briefer as we get nearer the time to start the pod. But anyway, Roddick. Now, Roddick, of course, and Federer would have a fairly epic bunch of battles at Wimbledon. They also crossed paths in New York and also in the final, as it turned out, in 2006. Any comments on the run and that particular final?
In 2006, yeah, that's so unfortunate for Roddick. Obviously, he'd already suffered at the hands of Federer on multiple occasions in finals, and it was just same old. I mean, they split the first 2 sets, and actually the third was pretty close, but eventually it all went Federer's way, and that was kind of always the case with Roddick. Of course, the 2009 final is the one that everybody remembers as the most sort of telling match of their rivalry, I would say. One match that does come to mind was James Blake, in particular in the quarterfinals, because Blake was playing really, really great tennis that year, and I remember he came onto the court playing, thinking he had a good chance because he kept the first set really tight, and then Federer's next level, he bageled him in the second set, and I'm sure I remember James Blake just coming off the court thinking, what on earth just happened? I don't know how many times they'd played before that, but 2006 Federer was probably his best form, I would say. I think that was his best year statistically, but just obviously you watch him on court as well. It was either 05 or 06, I would say. Both of them were great years, obviously, but 06 maybe just takes the biscuit by a whisker.
Just having a quick look at their head-to-head. Let's play this game again. 11 times Federer and Blake played. And what do you think the head-to-head is?
That's going to be rough. I'm going to say 10-1.
Whoa, this is getting ridiculous. Am I sharing my screen here or something? What's going on?
No, they're somewhere in the back of my head, to be fair.
By the way, this must be an ATP rule because I noticed it yesterday. When you retire from the sport, you don't entirely retire from the rankings. What the ATP website does is they give you a ranking of 0. Which is,
right.
I don't know. I think that's okay. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
It sort of suggests you were there at some point. In fact, I think being ranked 0 is better than 650 or something, which of course Federer did reach, I think, recently. By the way, I'm not being exact there. I know it may have been 743 or whatever, but he certainly had a ranking until quite recently in the 600s or 700s. But yeah, they give you a ranking of 0. Mysteriously, his age has reappeared. Yesterday, we were on the ATP website and his age just wasn't there at all. And we were suggesting that maybe he will constantly just live on forever during the Wimbledon one we did yesterday. Make sure you check that out, people. I had Nick on yesterday and we certainly went down memory lane. We did it for about 2 hours plus. Anyway, so we won't go on that long today because I have to work again in about an hour and a half. But listen, back to Federer and the US. We obviously mentioned Roddick there, and of course he suffered at his hands. I wonder if that was maybe even more painful being in New York. Although Roddick did win a US Open, so that helps. I'm trying to think what year that would have been. Would it have been 03?
He was the last guy to win before Federer went on his big run.
Good that Roddick got in there just in time.
Yeah,
it's almost
in the neck of time.
He just got through the trapdoor or whatever the expression is, just squeezed in into the elevator.
Only just as well, of course, because he faced match point in the semi-finals and was very, very close to going out against Nalbandian, I believe.
Did he?
Yeah. It was two sets down in a match point.
Did Nalbandian ever win a major?
No, 2 finals, and I think that was it.
Yeah, so now back. So it's just one of those things that tennis is such fine margins, such millimeters sometimes, match points, etc. That I'm so pleased that Roddick squeezed in, and then you tell me that story, and I'm feeling sad for Nalbandian. But anyway, I quite like the idea of him squeezing into an elevator though, just before Roger Federer arrives to press the button. So that's an image that I've got in my mind right now of his 2003 victory, if you like. At least he got up to the top floor on one occasion. Federer basically had the elevator all to himself for the next 5 years. So that's that. 07 is one of those 5 years. And I guess quite interestingly, of course, it is Djokovic who he vanquished in that final. And it was in a period where, of course, the head-to-head between him and Djokovic was very much going in Federer's favor in the early years. It wasn't until the real growth or the shoot up of Djokovic, I would suggest, as a player, was 2011. I know he won his first major in 08, but he transformed into the Djokovic we know today in 2011. So Federer managed to pick him off a couple of times early on in their career. And one of those occasions was this straight set victory, albeit very tight first 2 sets in 07.
Yeah, one little anecdote from this year is the round of 32. There's quite a funny YouTube video on YouTube there of him against Isner in the third round, and it's a 4-set match. Looks innocuous enough when you look at the scoreline, like tiebreak to Isner in the first set, and then 6-2, 6-4, 6-2. But the video is 105 points in a row without Federer making an unforced error. It's great. I mean, that was the year that he was just, again, amidst this US Open run where he just looked untouchable sometimes. You can understand there's now winning a tiebreak, obviously, but then there was just points where he looked in full flow, angelic almost. It was just crazy. And obviously after the 105 points, when he makes that unforced error, he scolds himself and gets on with it after that. He's still miffed after that on that 106 point. It's great. Yeah, you should watch it.
I wonder if he knew he was on a run of unforced errors. Probably not. I mean, I think it's always interesting to hear. I don't think it's a compliment or criticism either way. It's always interesting to hear certain players after matches will come out and give you exact detail about a particular point, a particular moment in the match. But then that same player, by the way, I've also seen, get confused about the change of ends, or I don't really mind either way. I just think it's kind of interesting. I would imagine and I'm thinking from my perspective, and I'm not Roger Federer, I'm a mere mortal. I would imagine he probably didn't know. I wouldn't probably know. I probably don't realize. I don't even probably realize my own stats, and they're very rarely collated, of course. What are your thoughts? Do you think he knew that he'd done 105 in a row and he wanted to keep it going? Or
no, I don't think so. There's there's an air of Federer being in the zone a lot of the time, if you know what I mean, where it's just like it's all effortless and just every shot just flows off the racket. So I imagine when he is in that sort of zone, he's probably not thinking about what's happening at the end of each point. He's just thinking, I gotta do this, or he's not thinking at all, really, probably.
Roger, if you're in the live chat right now, let us know if you knew you were on 105 points in a row without making an unforced error. Just let us know. If we get time this week, Roger, we will have you on, but I don't know if we've got time because I've got other legends of tennis to include, such as Vanch and Owen, as well as obviously Nick and Jack. So we'll see. We'll see. Maybe we'll get you in sometime before Christmas. Anyway, just quickly on the Djokovic sort of situation. So that was their first meeting in New York, was 07. And obviously, as you can see on the screen there, Federer winning quite comfortably. They would go on, of course, to meet a few more times, including the semi-final a year later. This time it was a bit closer. It's funny how we see these head-to-heads as they head towards another player, if you like, because Federer, I think, wins probably about 80% of the first 10 matches or so. In fact, pretty much that's it exactly. I think, or maybe 7 out of the first 10. But then we do what you see is the opponent eat into the lead, if you like. So we see with Djokovic getting a bit closer. So it was straight sets in 07 in the final, in 08 in the semi-final. Now it's 4 sets, including a couple of 7-5s in there. But
there's the 09 one, I suppose, was also straight sets, but it's pretty close.
Sure. That's right. 7-6, 7-5, 7-5. But anyway, don't upset my narrative, Jack. We're not here to spew facts. We're here to spew narrative, especially on a romantic week like this. But and that's a fair point. So anyway, 2007. Just quickly back to that one. Anyway, he does beat Djokovic in the final. Any other final thoughts on that particular match?
The match itself was really close. Djokovic did a really great job, but there was probably no other way it was going, to be honest. He made a better account for himself than Andy the next year, is all I'll say. Definitely.
Yeah, right. And so 2008, of course, I've got the fact that he won the final there 6-2, 7-5, 6-2, but I haven't actually got the person he beat. But of course, Jack, you'll need no reminding of this one.
Yeah, that was Andy's first final. Great effort to get there. But Federer made short work of him, really 2-5 and 2 in the end. And Djokovic in the semi-finals as well, as you say, 4 sets. They split the first 2 actually, and then the third was 7-5. So it was pretty close. It was remarkably close actually.
And this is one of the sort of 2 kits in particular. I remember he had in 08 was the sort of, I think it was red and grey, I think, or maybe red and brown. But though I think maybe it was 08, 09, because I think the one he was wearing when he loses, maybe it's one of the ones where he loses a couple of match points against Djokovic as well, is pretty cool. I think he rocked the red. In fact, I don't see red on tennis players enough, in my opinion. Let's bring red back, especially to a hard court. Anyway, so he won that final in 08. I mean, as an Andy Murray fan, by the way, are you old enough to remember this final?
Yeah, I do remember this one.
I mean, how crushing was that?
I wasn't as invested as Andy, let's say 4 years later, but it was still, I still recognise there was a British player in the final, and we don't get to see a British player in the final every day of every slam of the year, basically. So it hurt a wee bit, but nothing like some of the other defeats. And certainly a couple of years later in Australia, it was a lot more difficult to take. But early days for Andy, right? And you kind of felt like he had the world at his feet. He was going to go on to do great things, and he wasn't destined to win his first slam final against somebody on a 4 slam winning streak at the US Open.
At that particular final, that's true. Although he did go on and beat him at the Shanghai Masters that year, so I guess that was a nice little
So that is a good point, of course, because Andy actually had a really great record against Federer at that point. I think he was up 6-2 at some point in their careers, won the first 6 of their 8 meetings. So there was maybe a little bit of belief that he could win based on that, but I don't remember feeling like that. I must have just thought, Federer at the US Open is untouchable.
This 08, by the way, 2008, and the end of that year, is it, or at least in terms of the slams, that was his 13th. And I know he overtook, obviously, Sampras at Wimbledon the following year, but it's still, it's still quite remarkable that he got all those, got the 16 slams. I guess probably before the age of 30, he was on 16 slams, and then he would go on to win just 4 more in the next sort of decade of his career. And of course, Federer is someone else who really pushed the boundaries first in terms of age and performing. Certainly in the Open era, anyway. I mean, we're all familiar with the Bjorn Borg retiring at 26. I think McEnroe didn't go much beyond 30. And really, tennis players in general, I think Sampras was very similar. I think Agassi went on a bit longer. Maybe Agassi would argue he went through the barrier maybe even before Federer. I think he might well have gone on to his mid-30s. But Federer obviously pushing past mid-30s was also another barrier. And the fact that maybe he only won 4 in his second 10 years, we should. It's just because Novak and to a lesser extent Rafa have won so many majors in their 30s that we sort of forget that actually it was Federer who sort of pushed the winning major. I think he's still the oldest person until now. Maybe Novak and Rafa might well overtake this in the next year or so, but until now, I think Federer is the oldest person to win a major in the Open era.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 36 years old, right?
So that was his 13th slam, beating Murray. And the headline in The Guardian, by the way, I've just brought it up, Courageous Murray, blown away as Federer claims his 13th major. I guess that kind of sums it up. I mean, yeah. I like the way they got courageous in there. And of course, at the time, no British player had ever won or hadn't won a major since 36. I guess that would have been Fred Perry at Wimbledon. So yeah, Murray's plight, if you like, at that point in terms of majors at least continued. Any final points on this final before we move on?
No, happy to move on to 09. Great.
Cool. 09, yeah. And this is the point in a way, is that now memories of that final in particular come flooding back. I mentioned yesterday how I was in Zurich for the 09 Wimbledon final when he beat Roddick and hearing the cheers. I was also in Zurich for this final. I remember watching it on a television, as we used to do in 2009. And it wasn't that long ago, but yeah. And I remember watching that because I think did Wawrinka play Murray that same year in 09?
Is that who Andy lost to?
Maybe in 4th round or quarterfinal. I've got vague memories of Murray taking a lead in that match and then ultimately going out to Wawrinka. And Wawrinka hadn't...
No, it wasn't Stan. No, it was Cilic, apparently, that Andy lost to. Yeah.
Well, I wonder what year they played, mate. I thought Wawrinka...
That was 2013, definitely. They played then. Yeah, I don't know if they played again, but definitely the US Open, Wawrinka beat him in 2013.
Okay. So anyway, but that's fine. Yeah, 2013. Maybe it was 08. I'm thinking.
For
Wawrinka Murray. Yeah, quite possibly 08, I'm thinking.
And Andy beat Wawrinka, is that what you mean?
Just having a quick look at the stats now. US Open. Yeah, Murray did win. I know that was quite comfortable.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, whatever. I digress. Back to, we're not here for Wawrinka week, not yet. Might
be soon.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I don't know if we'll stretch it to a week though. Listen, Federer though, 09. Do you know anything about the run? Because I can certainly talk about the final.
Yeah, I remember Novak and that was it. But looking at the other players he beat, Hewitt, obviously not the player he once was, but still impressive to beat him in the round of 32 even, and then Robredo, who beats him in 2013, beats him fairly comfortably. Soderling, who beats him at the French Open the next year, also beats him. So it's all players, that pose a threat, but he still manages to make it fairly comfortable against all of them. He was obviously serving great again that year. Novak as well, straight sets against Novak, and that'll probably be the last time he beats Novak in straight sets at a slam in his career, I would imagine. I don't know that for a fact. Obviously played at Wimbledon in 2012. Was that straight sets? Not sure off the top of my head.
I think it was 4. But
I feel like it was 4. So yeah. I'm pretty sure that was the last time Federer managed that. So very, very impressive run to the final. The finals, where the story's at, though, right? Against Juan Martín del Potro.
And so my memories of this also, as I say, I keep talking about Zurich, but yeah, I was watching it on the TV there, and I think I was working as a waiter, perhaps in a restaurant. So I was quite fortunate in that. That although they're unsociable hours for the US Open, it wasn't so bad. I could certainly catch up with it, and none more so than the final. And I remember that it was shocking for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's Federer obviously having not lost in New York for 5 or 6 years. But secondly, as well, because the way the match panned out. Because I think often when Federer in particular, but any of the greats of the match, once they seize an initiative, they don't let it go against an underdog anyway. Even against each other. I mentioned on Twitter the other day that in the last decade or so, I was going through matches between the big three. Excuse me, I'm dropping Mo from this particular debate. Matches between the big three. I think the person who wins the first set, I think, won pretty much every match in the last decade when they met each other at majors. With the exception of 2021, when Novak managed to turn it around against Federer, against Rafa in the semi-final, and that's the only time. So even amongst the big three, but particularly, I always feel that when you've got a favourite playing an underdog, the underdog needs to take the lead, if you like. Is it okay to call Del Potro an underdog? I mean, I know he was growing as a player. I think we touched on him yesterday, obviously getting to the semi-finals against Federer in 2009 at the French Open. So he was growing as a player, but he was still 20 years old when it comes to this final in New York.
Yeah, definitely still an underdog. Yeah, you're right. He actually was, he'd established himself within the tour. He was making massive runs at big tournaments, and he had plenty of points under his belt to get him into the top 10. But yeah, he was only 20 years old, and it was his first Slam final. There was so many reasons as well. Obviously, Federer on a 60-odd match streak or whatever it was at the US Open as well. Just tons of reasons why Delpo should have been the heavy underdog.
Yeah, right. He had a pretty mammoth year. I think he lost to Nadal at the Australian Open, and there were some tears then. And there were more tears, of course, in New York because, but tears of victory this time. Did he play Nadal in the semis that year as well in New York?
Federer, Delpo, sorry, yeah. It was very easy. It was very easy, wasn't it? It was like 3-2 or something like that. Very one-sided. The only guy to beat Nadal and Federer back to back. No, that can't be right. I'm sure somebody else has done it at a Slam, but it'll be right up there.
Djokovic might have done it, but yeah, I mean that's still a very impressive thing. And the other sort of sad thing from Del Potro's point of view, of course, he was 20, and probably winning that major, you probably thought, oh, this guy's going to go on and win half a dozen. Just goes to show, and we talked about it a little bit last week when we talked about Casper Ruud and Ons Jabeur, obviously being in the US Open finals recently, that you just don't know. You don't know unless you're one of these three guys. And even now with these three guys, obviously with them coming towards the end of their careers, but you just don't know when you're going to get the next. I think Alcaraz is the exception to that, but with the rest, and maybe apart Aniga, I think with the rest, you just don't know whether they're going to be in a final again. So that was the case for Delpo. In fact, I don't recall him being in another final. I remember him getting to the semi-finals of the French in 2018, I think. And of course,
he got to the final of the US in 2018 as well, 9 years later.
Yeah, of course he did. Yeah, we lost to Djokovic, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that was Djokovic's most recent US Open title. But yeah, anyway, back to this final, and so it started as you would imagine, 6-3, comfortable first set for Roger. And as I said to you, my memories of watching on TV were for the first couple of hours. Even there was never any danger of there being an upset. It wasn't until the tiebreak at the end of the second set that made you think. And even then, it was still. And in fact, I think, of course, he takes a 2-1 lead as well, Federer. So it's almost like he's taken the lead. He's lost the initiative once. He's not going to lose it twice. Well, boy, he did.
Yeah, definitely. The one, to be fair, there was one moment that stood out throughout the match where I thought Delpo's got very lucky there, and we might have talked about it on the show before when Federer serves for the set in the second set, and it's 30-all on his serve, and he hits I think Delpo hits a forehand down the line that looks like it's a whisker out, but the Hawkeye replay, and it's one of the first tournaments that uses Hawkeye, says it's in by a few millimeters, and Federer is livid about it. He's certain the ball's out, and he keeps talking to the umpire at the change of ends because Delpo does go on to break, and obviously takes the set as well, and that could have been straight sets, I guess, if that hadn't happened.
Yeah. I wonder if that's the moment where he lost faith in Hawkeye, because he has gone on record a few times to talk about his displeasure with Hawkeye. He even talks about it during one of those commercials he does when he knocks the he said, because I think it's a commercial, and so it's supposed to be sort of a casual conversation backstage, because it's like a commercial within a commercial. He's like, and he knocked, the one I mean, where he knocks a can of deodorant, I think, off a guy's head by doing the serve. And at the beginning of that, there's just a few words where so it just sort of, the camera sort of pans in and it's like, yeah, Hawkeye. Let me show you how much I trust Hawkeye, or something like that. He says, I trust myself more than Hawkeye. Put the can of deodorant on your head, and he ends up serving at 150, 200 kilometers an hour, knocking the 150. I'm a lot much more than 150. That's sort of club player level if you're a really good club player. But sort of 200 kilometer an hour serve. And he knocks the can of deodorant off his head. Anyway, I digress. Any final thoughts on this final? Because I do want to get going.
Yeah, no, great final. Delpo, obviously massive story for Delpo, and it must have been properly heartbreaking for Federer, regardless of whether or not he'd won 2 of the last 3 slams that year. Obviously, he really would have wanted to keep that streak going, so it must have been difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, he would never win a US Open again. 2010 and 2011, probably as epic and as memorable as the Delpo match, to be honest with you. I mean, he obviously had 2 match points on the Djokovic serve, if I remember rightly, in the 2010 match.
Yeah.
He had 2 match points on his own serve. Both occasions, of course, if he'd won the match, and he was obviously within a whisker of doing so, he was going to play Nadal in the final. Personally, I wish that he'd won certainly the 2011 match, because Djokovic obviously goes through to that final and beats Nadal. I remember watching that in a pub in Spain, the 2011 final. Again, I thought, Nadal will win this, and Djokovic sort of surprised me. But of course, that was the Djokovic epic year, or at least for large parts of that 2011 year. But yeah, I mean, we never got to see Nadal against Roger at the US Open. It's been a narrative that's been spun a lot more recently, or been talked about a lot more in the last few days. I have to say, maybe because I'm not a New Yorker, it doesn't bother me that much. I mean, they've played each other 100 times, or no, not 100 times. They played each other 40 times, I think, Federer and Nadal. Whether it happens it's not like they never played on a hard court. I thought that was quite interesting what you said about Murray and Federer never playing on clay. Maybe that if Nadal never played Federer on clay, I think I'd be quite annoyed, because I think that would skew the stats somewhat. But they played plenty of times on clay, so I'm more than happy with that. So it doesn't really affect me that much. I think it was a stat I heard a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, but didn't really think about it much more. But anyway, back to these semi-finals. What are your thoughts on these 2 matches?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the matches in isolation, because the tournaments kind of fade into obscurity, right? For Federer in particular, who probably the only lasting memory from these 2 tournaments must have been heartbreaking in both matches, because they were absolutely matches he should have won. Now, the 2010 one was tough. It really was, but the properly heartbreaking one was the 2011 one, and that's where there's a ton of sort of narrative there, a lot of story to tell, because, well, firstly, the 2010 one, I don't think Federer had lost he had lost a 5-set match the year before, to Delpo, so that's wrong. But yeah, the 2 match points, I don't think he had a massive chance on. It didn't feel like they were kind of on his racket, to be honest. So Novak just did a good job to sort of clutch that one out and eventually get to 7-5 in the 5th set. Same in the next year, 7-5 in the 5th set, but there was so much more going on. So, like, 2 sets to love, firstly. I don't think Federer had, or do you know what? He had lost from 2 sets to love for the first time the tournament before to Wilfried Tsonga.
Oh, okay, Wimbledon. So it's two slams in a row where he goes out winning the first 2 sets.
Yeah, so for fans, obviously, it must have been very, very difficult to watch. It happened for a second consecutive tournament, but it didn't look like it was going to happen at like 5-3, 2 match points on his own serve, 40-15. We've seen it before, of course. Now that his career is over, he's been in a similar situation. But this one was very different, because the first match point was a quick sort of just blasé swipe of the racket from Djokovic. Now goes down in the annals of history as one of the most important shots of his career. That huge return, I'm sure you remember it, John.
Interesting you mentioned blasé, because by the way, just to let the viewers know, if you haven't seen this shot, it is an unbelievable return. If you're a Djokovic fan, I'm sure you just go, wow, this is the best return of all time, and this is him showing arguably the best serve of all time, who's boss. If you are not a Djokovic fan, you probably take Federer's view, which was what he took in the press conference afterwards, which was, seen by some as being a bit bitter. I have no problems with it. I'm a neutral observer when it comes to Federer and Djokovic largely. Federer's take was it was a lucky shot and he had nothing to lose. So, maybe I would have done the same, or I'm paraphrasing, and I hope I'm not putting too many words in Roger's mouth, because he certainly was like, well, it was a very good shot, but he had nothing to lose was his thoughts.
I think he said something along the lines of, I wasn't brought up to play that way, I guess, match point
really?
down.
Did he go that? Go down that way? What does he mean by that exactly?
I think he means he wasn't taught to just sort of throw in the towel down match point.
Or be blasé, yeah. Okay, be blasé. So that's the blasé comment there, Jack, which I'm not disagreeing with, and I just think it's quite interesting because that was, well, as soon as you said blasé, I was thinking immediately of the Federer press conference afterwards.
My comment on it is, I suppose I could see why Federer would be better in 2011, but I think now we're in 2022 and we've seen Novak play that sort of shot more than once, and you realise that, well, was it actually that lucky? Djokovic is actually one of the best returners of all time. I think he can maybe sort of make his peace with that shot more so than he would have then.
Jack, you do some coaching, and I wonder what you think about this. Sometimes, and so we are talking about a slightly lower level than a US Open semi-final. If you don't mind me saying, Jack, I'm guessing you're not coaching a TFO or something like this.
No.
So do you see how I got TFO in there because he got to the US Open semi-final? You see, I'm not. It wasn't just a random player. I nearly said Yannick Sinner, and then I went, no, let's switch to TFO. But anyway, so this is what I'm thinking, and I wonder whether you think as a coach if this is the right or the wrong thinking to have it. It's very difficult to not think it. Sometimes I think before even the serve comes in, this is club level, of course. Sometimes I think, I might go big on this one. And that's before even seeing the serve. Now, don't get me wrong. I've seen 100 first serves already in the match, if you like. But or 50 or so. But I wonder if that's, you shouldn't really have that. Should you have that attitude before a serve has even come in? Maybe you need to react to the serve. I mean, you've only got a second to do so, especially when it comes against Federer. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that, to be fair, I don't think the EU can underestimate the speed at which the serve does come in at a pro level. I think when you've got, you're right, less than half a second to react to the serve, then I think there was probably a bit of instinct there. I don't think he would have just been going, I'm going to go big in this one regardless. I think he might have thought, if I get a racket on this one, if I get a bit of time on the ball and I've got my feet in the right position, then I'll go big in this one, because it's not Novak's normal play. He likes to play down the middle of the court, and I use him as the poster boy for that tactic actually when I'm teaching it as well. Like, this is the greatest returner of all time, and he doesn't go for the lines on return generally. So I imagined it would have been premeditated, and he probably thought, if I get it on my forehand in particular, then I'm going to go for it. I think if it went to his backhand, we wouldn't have seen a crazy sort of inside out backhand winner for sure. Like, I think he just it would have been premeditated, John, I imagine. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
First serve, of course. And so I wonder why. I mean, listen, I know Djokovic is incredible on the backhand. I think I know he's an incredible returner on both sides. But in that moment, in that part of his career, I mean, clever after the event, I'm sure Federer regrets not going to the backhand now. But I mean, on the first serve anyway. I mean, I think second serve can be a bit different. But anyway, forehand he goes. Djokovic still has a lot of work to do. It's only 40-30, of course. Still another match point to go. But my memory of the second match point is a much more vague.
I've got it memorised fairly well. It was actually very close, and Federer was in the rally as much as Djokovic was. In fact, I would argue he probably was a little bit more the aggressor, because he had a few forehands in a row that kind of put him just a smidgen up in the point, and I think he has one more forehand to make it very difficult for Djokovic, an inside-out one that would have been very heavy, and I think he nets it, I'm pretty sure. So he actually had a big chance in that second match point and blew it. Yeah.
So it's an unforced error from Federer. On the forehand side, or the backhand?
Forehand, yeah.
Forehand, yeah. Anyway, funny enough, I've seen during some of these episodes, I've seen a few errors on the forehand side that you just wouldn't expect at huge moments from Federer. But anyway, the forehand didn't really let him down that often. Anyway, so maybe we shouldn't be too harsh. Gets to deuce. Djokovic ends up prevailing, as it turns out. He obviously breaks, and then obviously he breaks again because he wins 4 games in a row to win that final set 7-5. Any sort of conclusions on the way that match panned out?
Yeah, it's just very telling of Djokovic's career. Not very surprising in hindsight that he was eventually able to pull off something like that, and really can't be understated. It's an incredible achievement, especially against Federer. I don't think any other player on a hard court could have done that to him. So fair play to Djokovic. I am aware, by the way, that this is a Federer stream, so the amount of Federer fans waiting for us to move on patiently is probably quite high. So
Yeah, we will move on. Djokovic goes on to win the tournament in 2011. Anyway, the only thing is, though, it is for the next decade, and I think we've probably spent. Don't worry, Federer fans. I think at least in terms of this video, 80% has been focused on this first half of his time at the US Open, because the second half of his time is less glittery, if you like, less celebrated. Unfortunately for the Swiss. In 2012, he loses to the sixth seed Thomas Berdych, who obviously would go on to face Murray in the semi-finals. We touched on that, I think, earlier. I'm not sure if that was on or off stream when we said that I'm sure Murray was quite pleased about that result. Do you actually remember anything about, I mean, obviously you remember Murray's run and obviously winning against Djokovic in the final that Murray did, but do you have any memories of Federer losing to Berdych, and in particular the consequences for Murray?
Not really, to be honest. All I can say about the Berdych Federer matchup is that it's quite a favourable one for Berdych compared to some of the defensive baseliners in the game, like Djokovic and Murray, who he had a pretty poor record against both of them, especially Djokovic. I think it's like 25-3 or something like that. Federer, I think, we're about C. Yeah, 6 matches, which obviously for somebody like Federer is pretty decent, and he's got 2 slam wins over him at least. I think he might just be Wimbledon and the US Open. I could be wrong.
Didn't he lose to him at Wimbledon as well, though, in the semis one year?
Yeah, just once, right? So just 2 wins overall at slams. Is that right? So 2010 in the quarters. Are you thinking he might have lost?
Was it? Yeah, quarters. Yeah, in 2010 quarters. Yeah, sorry, not semis, quarters.
Yeah. So Berdych can basically play the same game as Federer, but to a lesser degree. He'll take care of his service games better than, say, Djokovic and Murray, but he will have far less chances on Federer's serve than those two. Or sorry, Federer would have far less chances on Berdych's serve, I should say, than Djokovic and Murray would. So it's not a great matchup, obviously, because it's Federer, but he had more chances to beat him than Djokovic and Murray, basically.
Got it. 2013, maybe a bigger surprise even than the year before. In fact, I'm sure it is, because he lost to Robredo in the 4th round, so a round earlier than 2012. And not only that, Robredo had a 0-10 head-to-head against Federer before that match, so he'd never beaten him before, probably barely laid a glove on him, and somehow he manages to beat him in 2013. Any thoughts on this match before we move on to the Cilic semi in 2014?
Do you know, I remember putting a bet on the match, and I bet for Robredo.
Okay.
So I can't have felt like there was a huge possibility Federer was going to win. It must have been based on how the rest of his year was going, because it really wasn't a good year for Federer at all. So I guess that result wasn't mega surprising. Certainly Wimbledon, when he lost to Stakhovsky, right? That was ending a streak of however many quarterfinals in a row at slam level, maybe about 36 or something like that. Might have been even more than that, close to 10 years of slam quarterfinals. So yeah, it's a poor year for Federer, and probably one to forget for people listening.
2014, lost to Cilic.
I was going to say the story of the tournament for me would have been the match before, when he played Monfils, because that was Federer. To be fair, Federer's great with his back against the wall, and actually he's got one of the best records in the game from 2 sets to love down. He might have won more matches than even Andy, possibly, actually. I think 10 from 2 sets to love down, but it had felt like a while since he clutched out a win like this. And then the one against Monfils, I think he had to save match points in the 3rd set, and it was just a great match. Monfils played outstanding stuff. Again, kind of like Berdych, Monfils was one of those guys that could take care of his serve better than most on the tour, so he always made Federer's life kind of difficult. I think his head-to-head with Federer wasn't that bad, actually. I'm tempted to say 10-4.
Monfils, yeah.
To Monfils, yeah. So yeah, it was a great win. That would definitely be the story of his tournament that year, and maybe it went into into his performance against Cilic in the next round, because he did look a little out of sorts. Cilic obviously just untouchable that year, though.
Yeah, but it's the only time Cilic ever beat Federer in his entire career.
Yeah, that's not too surprising.
Yeah, maybe it's not too surprising, but it just happened to happen at a US Open semi-final, which for Federer must have been a bit galling. Perhaps it could have happened at a slightly smaller tournament at a slightly earlier stage, and maybe it wouldn't have been quite so bad. But I mean, he was. I think Federer had a 5-set match with him at Wimbledon a couple of years later.
Yeah,
Albeit that
from
Federer
2007.
prevailed in that in 2016. But this is that. But Cilic had also not even pushed him to 5 until this match. So every match before, I think I'm just checking the stats right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They played 6 times or 5 times, and Federer had won all 5. And Federer had only dropped 2 sets amongst those 5 matches. So it was still, despite the fact that you say he might well have been jaded after the Monfils match, for Cilic to win this in straight sets in 2014 must have been a bit tough for the Swiss.
Definitely, yeah. And I remember watching it. He just never had a chance. In fact, did he even manage to break serve? He didn't, I think. I've not got that
At
confirmed.
least I'm looking at the result, and it was
He broke serve
7.
once, yeah.
Did he? Okay, so
Yeah.
it was close-ish each set. I mean, 6-3, 6-4, 6-4. But nevertheless, straight sets for Cilic. Is that the year Cilic won it in the final?
That is the year Cilic won it. Yeah. It's also just, this gives you an idea of how dominant Cilic was. The amount of service points that Federer won compared to the amount of return points he won was sort of the biggest disparity since losing to Agassi all the way back in 2001 at the US Open. So it is the most dominant performance as a server somebody's had against Federer, bar right back at the start of his career.
Wow. I think I'm right in saying this is in 2015, it's the only time that Federer and Djokovic played in the final at the US Open. Is that right?
Yeah, I suppose that. No, 2007, of course. They
2007, yeah, of course,
yeah.
they won Federer won. So in the final at the US Open, they have a one each record, if you like. Novak Djokovic obviously winning this match in 4 sets, 6-4, 5-7, 6-4, 6-4. By now, Djokovic had the Indian sign, I would suggest, over Federer. I remember a pretty dominant victory 6 months later in Australia as well from Djokovic, although it was also 4 sets. But in a way, I think Federer just played some godlike tennis for about 20 minutes that managed to snatch a set from Djokovic. Other than that, it was all one-way traffic. But that's Australia. Back to the US and this final. Do you have any memories or thoughts on this match?
Yeah, but very decent memories of this one. The story of the match must have been the breakpoint conversion. Let's look it up and see.
Oh, so Federer had lots of break points, did he?
4 of 23 breakpoints converted. So it just felt like Federer was constantly giving himself a chance, and Djokovic was almost lapping it up. He was just never ever gonna let himself get broken. It felt like one of those matches that Federer had so many chances to win, but just Djokovic was almost laughably just a little step ahead of him all the time, and it must have been super heartbreaking for people as Federer fans, because that was probably his best chance over the last sort of 10 years, I would say.
Yeah. By the way, I put an interesting question talking to break points. I put it on Twitter, and I really don't know if the stat even is out there. I would be fascinated to know. We spoke about being love 40 down and the chances of losing the game when you're love 40 down. I'm guessing this is across all surfaces. Was it men and women as well?
No, it wasn't men and just men.
Men. So men across all surfaces, the chances of you coming back from love 40 down as the server are 20%. What I found even more interesting, though, is because there's no reason that makes sense. 20%. You know, some people might thought it might be a little bit higher, but to me that makes sense. What would be really interesting is when you're broken serve from love 40. I would have thought that from 100 occasions, it would be 33, so to speak, or 34 for each of the 3 points, if you like. So love 40, when you're broken from love 40, 33% of the time will be on love 40, 33% of the time will be on 1540, and 33% will be on 3040. My thoughts, though, are just as a feeling that maybe 1540 is the most likely one to get broken. Maybe at love 40, you're like, oh, well, what? If you're the server, you're like, oh, whatever. If you're at 30-40, you've got some momentum, and the other guy's thinking, my goodness me, I've lost 2 chances now. So even if it's 35% on 1540, given the millions of samples we've got, that would be strong enough for me to think, there you go, there's something going on there. Certainly if it's sort of 36, 37% plus, that would be enough for me to think that's an interesting thought that it maybe it's on Love 40, maybe it's on 30-40, but anyway, I digress. That's probably a chat for another day. Listen, he had so many chances to break serve, didn't take it. Djokovic prevails in 4. We then move on to 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, which in some ways kind of not merge into one, but it is the sort of final throws. 2016, of course, he didn't play. He was injured, I believe, with a back. Yeah, so that's we can pretty much skip that. But I mean, obviously, that was the first time he missed the US Open, I think, since '99. So like 17 years. And given how often we see sometimes with other players, whether you'll be a Del Potro fan or a Wawrinka fan or even a Rafael Nadal fan, how often they miss some of these majors. That's pretty impressive run. 2017, he's back, and this is his Renaissance year. So what happened to him in 2017?
This is such an interesting year because for me, I suppose I've said 2015. Yeah, 2015 he came the closest in terms of the round he got to. But going into the 2017 US Open, he was in the best form he'd been in for years and years, and loads of people would have, loads of people would have made them the favourite going into that tournament. And the first 2 rounds were super spotty, but he did manage to survive them. Tiafoe in 5 sets was a great match. Usney in 5 sets was, albeit a different match, but it's certainly very, very close as well. The Tiafoe one was really down to the wire. But then he comes out and he regroups, and it kind of felt like that was the sort of the precipice he'd survived that tournament, because he always has a little bit of a bother somewhere at the US Open right over the last 10 years. So after that, rolled against Lopez, rolled against Kohlschreiber, and here we were in the quarterfinals against Delpo once more. And oh my God, it was so close, that match. I don't know how much you remember of this one, John, but the third set, Federer has a set point, I'm sure, and he might have had a chance. I don't think it was an unforced error, but I'm pretty sure he was in the rally, and Delpo takes it by an absolute whisker, and then he just misses it in the 4th. But I mean, if you're taking that third set, fancy these chances.
Yeah, 4 sets defeat there for Federer. It was a similar story in terms of being 4 sets against John Millman a year later. My memory of this match is purely the weather, actually, funny enough. I probably should have better memories of the tennis itself. It was a tight 4 sets. Federer wins the first 6-3. He was the number 2 seed going into the 2018 tournament. Obviously, this 2017, 2018. By now, of course, he'd already won his final slam, as it turns out. He was on 20, going for his 21st in New York. He wins the first set 6-3 against Millman, but then ends up losing the next 3, 7-5, 7-6, 7-6. But the sweltering heat, and I think Federer, for one reason or another, seemed to struggle in it a bit more than the Australian did. Any thoughts on this match?
Yeah, this was a weird one. I don't know. Millman's great, and he kind of has an air of Djokovic and Murray about him, at least from the baseline, because he really doesn't miss anything. And he must have just been in Federer's head a bit in that regard, because it should have been a match he came through, right? And again, really good chance that year. Who won that year in 2018? Djokovic, I suppose.
Djokovic, yeah, he did, yeah.
And he might not have done so well against Delpo again, who knows? But yeah, it had an opportunity missed.
Yep. Possibly an opportunity missed was also 2019, but of course by now this is his final US Open. And in 2019, what we have learned even in the last couple of days is that the knee was already becoming an issue by the summer of 2019. I'm not necessarily saying that's why he loses matches. I think perhaps adrenaline can take over, but perhaps in training in particular, it may well have impacted him during those sessions, perhaps. But he loses in 5 sets to Dimitrov in 2019, which makes, of course, he would have been on the opposite side of the draw to Nadal that year, from memory, because I think Dimitrov played Medvedev in the semifinals. So Nadal playing Berrettini in the other semifinal. So I still think Federer would have struggled against Medvedev, given how unbelievable his form was in that sort of some end of summer 2019. But Dimitrov, losing to Dimitrov, I mean, Dimitrov had, I think, run into the big guys a few times before, and Dimitrov has always been. It's unbelievable to think he's in he's in his 30s now. I think Dimitrov, bearing in mind he was the new kid on the block that was gonna dismantle the big four, as it probably was when he first emerged. But losing in 5 sets to Dimitrov at his last ever match at the US Open in the quarterfinal stage. Any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is an opportunity missed, because he played Dan Evans and David Goffin in the rounds before, right? And I was just looking that up there. Throughout all of his runs at the US Open, those 2 matches take first and second spot for the most dominant matches of his US Open career in terms
Wow.
of points won. So even in 2019, Federer was putting together clinics against some of the sort of top 50 players
Yeah.
of the tour. I mean, great
Top man with 15th
performances.
seed. So
Yeah, exactly. But then, I think he was a little injured against Dimitrov because I don't remember his movement being great, and there was
well,
talk
that's
about
what we
it
sort of
afterwards.
touched on. That's what we sort of
Yeah.
touched on. I think some there have been, from his coaching team, at least not from Roger himself as yet, but his coaching team have given a few interviews in the last sort of couple of days, and they've said that the issues started to emerge before Wimbledon 2019.
Right. Yeah. Well, there you go. Then. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Of course. Yeah, this was after Wimbledon 2019 as well. So we knew he had the potential to win slams at least. It felt like a pretty sad one, I would say, and a shame for him for that to be his last US Open appearance. Right.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly before we round things off here, those two matches you just mentioned, I actually remember. I don't remember the 4 matches before Dimitrov, but I do remember his first round match against a guy called Nagal. I actually remember this happening. I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cute. And actually, this Indian guy
Yeah.
Nagal has tweeted recently that at least he got to share the court with Federer, and that was nice for him to say. And I actually remember that first round because Nagal won the first set, but then Federer runs out fairly easily in 4 sets. That's in the first round. But coming back to those 2 matches in the third and fourth round, he lost 9 games across 2 matches against Dan Evans, who would have been pushing top 30. He would have been probably top 40, I would have thought. So that's just, at least in terms of the seedings, and also just the fact that he's a very good player. That's pretty much as tough as it comes in the third round. And then in the fourth round, he's got Daniel Goffin, which is your classic fourth round opponent. It's not like he got lucky and managed to avoid a seed, if you like. And he loses 9 games. And as you mentioned, that his biggest points hauls advantage, at least over his opponent in the third and fourth round. And he's obviously just come off the back of being within a whisker of winning Wimbledon, as we know. So, yeah, to lose to Dimitrov would have been disappointing. And who knows if he was hampered a little bit, particularly if it goes to a 5th set. But listen, Dimitrov wins. I still think there's a long way for Federer to go if he's going to go on and win that tournament, bearing in mind he's going to have to skittle Medvedev and Nadal, who were both in their own respects on fire on the hard courts in North America that summer.
Yeah, it was probably, if I was looking back at the last 10 years, the 2 opportunities, or maybe the 3 years, I would say, sort of 2011 when he lost to Djokovic from 2 match points up, 2015 when he lost in the final again to Novak, and then probably 2017 when he lost to Delpo, and he had a pretty decent chance in that match too.
Well, that brings the US Open time for Federer to a close, as it did in 2019. But here in 2022, we've got a couple more shows on Federer to come. One tomorrow evening, at least tomorrow evening, as far as European time is concerned. I'm going to be doing some of his greatest matches with Owen and Vanch. And then I think on Friday, we're going to do another show as well on the rivalry with Nadal and how that panned out, if you like. I think many of us know how it panned out, actually, ups and downs, of course, as they were with that rivalry. So that's still to come. But for today, thank you, Jack, for stopping by.
Thanks very much, John. I'd say one closing note just to finish as well, just because I think it's necessary after looking at his last 10 years, because the nature of looking at a slam is, unless you win it, you're probably going to focus on the loss, right? So it feels like there's a lot of disappointment over the last 10 years or so for almost knocked over my mic there. The last 10 years, am I still on, by the way? I don't know if I've
Just
unplugged
about,
something.
yeah, you're fine.
Over the last 10 years or so, you'd imagine you'd just be focusing on the disappointment, but I think it should be said that Federer's US Open performances over the last, even after 2008, were great. He still put in loads and loads of brilliant matches that just go under the radar because they made them look really easy. His matches won there is still the most out of the big 3. He's won more matches than the other 3, and in terms of winning percentage, he's great there. And obviously that run from 2004 to 2008, though we talked about it for a little while, is one of the best runs at a slam of all time.
Yeah. Maybe, probably perhaps even only second to Rafa's in Paris in many respects, because no one has done anything close to it since. And I mentioned how Connors and Sampras both won 5 times in New York, but not 5 anywhere near 5 in a row. So hats off to him for that. But there's only so much time we have. There's only so many hours in the day. So we are going to have to bring this to a close. Jack, once again, thank you very much. And everybody else, Tennis World, thanks for stopping by. Cheers.
Thanks, John. Thank you, guys.